Hello, and welcome to the Writers and Illustrators of the Future podcast. This is John Goodman, your host. This podcast is dedicated to the aspiring writer and artist and will provide inspiration and tips from top professionals in the field. If you've been listening to this podcast or are new to it, I thank you very much. I would also appreciate if you took a moment and followed it on whatever platform you use to listen to your podcasts. This week's guest is Michele Cobb, the Executive Director of the Audio Publishers Association. I first met her around 2008 or so when she was with BBC Audiobooks, which became AudioGo. She is the Director of Audio Publishing of LA Theater Works, which frequently brings her to Los Angeles. In addition to being the Executive Director of the Audio Publishers Association, she is the publisher of Audiofile magazine and has become, for all intents and purposes, the spokesperson for the audiobook industry. Welcome, Michele.
Hi, John. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, when you agreed to do this podcast interview, I was really excited about it, but I went back and it's been 2008. It seems like a lot longer, but it's 13 years.
It's true.
Yeah, that's when we started our program. And then I would meet you several places at conventions. You were at the library shows and the book shows, and we'd always run into you. And how old is your daughter now?
13.
Yeah, so she was just born, and you were carrying her around as a baby, going around to all your different meetings, and you'd have her there in your booth there, and I always come by to see her and just watch her as she grew up throughout the years. So pretty amazing. So how did you originally get started with audiobooks?
Well, it's a funny story because I actually was a listener. I worked in theater and did a lot of traveling all over the US and Europe, doing different types of theater, and that meant a lot of driving. So I got into audiobooks because I was driving so much, and part of that I was driving with a touring partner, and I didn't love his music and he didn't love my music, so we really needed audiobooks to prevent fighting. And then when I moved to Los Angeles, I answered an ad for LA Theater Works and did some evening work selling tickets to their live performances, which are then recorded and become audio works. And they said, hey, you seem to know what's going on. Would you like to come join us? And I did. And I really just became the audio expert. They didn't really have anyone who had studied the industry that much. So I became ensconced in audiobooks and went on to work for the BBC, and then started working for myself and went back to LA Theater Works. So it's all come full circle.
Yeah, but then you've become, like I said, you've become the voice for the audio industry. I've seen you all over the place, but involved with libraries, and we used to put on shows together at the library shows, which was a lot of fun back in the early 2010s or so.
Yes.
So just interested in the overall future of audio publishing. So first off, how has it changed since you first got involved?
Well, when I first got involved, one of my first jobs at LA Theater Works was packing cassette tapes and mailing them off to libraries. So, I saw the transition go from cassette to CD and eventually into digital. And now the industry is very much a digital industry. We've been doing it for more than 20 years. So we're experts in things like metadata, which it took a little bit longer for ebooks to catch up to that. So yeah, it's been amazing, and there's been so much growth. When I started in the industry, I would have to explain what an audiobook was, and you can say, oh, books on tape, when you go to the library. Now I just say, oh yeah, I do a lot of work in audiobooks, and people tell you what they're listening to. So it's become more ubiquitous in terms of people actually participating and using the format, and it's really just exploded. We've seen as an industry in our sales survey for the APA, 9 years of double-digit growth in dollars. So that's pretty crazy to have that much growth over nearly a decade now.
That's amazing. And what's really amazing with that too is that I think it was the audio portion of the overall book sales that caused the book industry to be showing in the black a couple of years ago. Maybe it was also this past year too.
Yeah, audio has definitely been the growth area for publishing. So we were also really well set up for a change in the pipeline, which happened in the last year, when suddenly, you might not be getting a print book in the mail as easily, and you might not be able to go to your local independent bookstore to buy a book. So we were already a digital delivery system for books, and that continued. And what was amazing for audiobooks is that we've been recording a lot in homes, so the pipeline to produce continued on as well in a way I think people didn't expect. Not everyone had a home studio. There's still a lot of books that are recorded in professional studios. And we found that balance and made the changes that we needed during the time when we were essentially locked down.
Yeah, that's something I wanted to check out too, is just the change in audio publishing itself, because you talk about home studios.
Yes.
And there's also ACX, which now is this whole thing that Amazon is, or Audible, I guess, is the one that set up originally. Is that right? And then it went, when they got bought by Amazon, then it just became the Amazon recording platform.
So it was set up as the Audiobook Creation Exchange in 2011. And it's one now of multiple platforms where an individual author can go and essentially do it themselves. It provides a way for a rights holder to get connected with a studio or a narrator, or a combination of a narrator and post-production. So it's really a way to ensure that you can produce and distribute your audiobook. And it was the first in 2011, but now it's one of multiple options. So you, as an independent author, don't have to be afraid about getting your title produced. You can do it yourself. That's
way cool. So now, make sure you got this straight so that other people listening can also get it straight too, because we have a lot of writers and aspiring writers listening to this show. So a person can they have their own intellectual property, their own IP, and they can then go and record it themselves, or can they then go, is there like a catalog? I'm going to get this person to record it and then to offer. How's that work?
Sure. So there are a couple of options. If you want to go record it yourself, and let me first warn you, it is not easy. So everyone thinks that they can do it. And let me tell you, it takes a lot of skills. There are a lot of big name actors who are great on television and film, but really struggle in the studio when having to read their own words, because it's a very different skill. So someone who is an author who isn't necessarily a performer, it can be a tough transition to record your own words. If you do want to record your own words, I highly recommend that you go into a professional studio and work with someone who can help you through the process and who knows all the technical requirements. If you don't want to record it yourself, but you do want it recorded, you can go into a platform like ACX or Findaway Voices. You upload your book in the print format, and you can pair yourself with a narrator or a studio to help you produce it. So there's all sorts of different options, but it's all very easy to do in that format.
That's great. So now on doing this, because I know people will be interested in this, because it's, as an intellectual property, it's something that can then further how to make money. So how can you generate more income off your IP? So I know with books, when you go with an indie, you can get up to 45% of the income from book sales. You do a lot more hustling for it than you do with a big publisher, which is maybe 10 or 15%. But how's that work now with audiobook publishing? Because I don't know what the numbers are.
So if you're doing it yourself, it depends on which platform you distribute from. So each of them has their own network of where they're going to distribute to. And it's very, very clear on their websites what royalty percentage you will get as the author. If you are selling your rights to an independent publisher, one that just does audio, or one that does audio and print that's looking for some additional titles to record, that's a different percentage, and that's you're kind of selling a sub-right. So if you do it yourself, all the royalties are coming to you based on whatever the deal is with the distribution platform. And if you are selling to a publisher who's an audio publisher, they'll provide you with a royalty.
Okay, so now, with someone who's like an aspiring writer, or a writer who's got his first book out there, is there a best practice on how to go about doing this thing here? Because a person can come in, I can read. So a person might have their own idea, maybe they had a dream and they thought, I can do this. but then they haven't quite touched on reality. Is there a best practice on how to move into the industry as an author?
Yeah, I would say the first thing is, if you really want to read it yourself, first go sit in your bathroom for an hour and try to read your own book. And if it's a struggle to get through things, it's probably not for you. In that case, I would say then go ahead and check out a place like ACX or Findaway Voices, where it's one-stop shopping. You put the text in, and they can help you produce it. They can help you find a narrator. You can do auditions. There's a whole way of that. If you decide you want to record it yourself, go find a professional studio. So the Audio Publishers Association, where audiopub.org, has a tab that is about, and on there is a getting started page, and that lists all sorts of studios all over the US and Canada and the UK. So you can find a studio in your area that can help you with that.
That's great. And then do you also list on your webpage, you also list like narrators?
We don't list narrators, but what we do list are a couple of guides for people who are authors, things to think about when you are deciding how to produce your title. And there's a list of different distributors there. So you can make your book one place, make your audiobook, and distribute it elsewhere, or make your audiobook via one method and distribute via one of these companies. There's lots of different options. So if you're thinking about an audiobook, I highly recommend taking the time to go to that page.
I absolutely agree with that. Now, you've got also translations. So now you've got the audiobooks, because now audiobooks, not just the United States, but it's growing amazing in other countries too, other foreign languages. So how does that work?
So if you've already got the title translated into another language, then you can go to a producer who has different languages. And you can find those, again, if you go to Findaway Voices and say, I would like to have this recorded in English and Spanish, they'll help match you with narrators. Or if you're very industrious and you know a narrator that you really like their work, you can find them usually a website or on social media, and you can reach out to them to ask what it would cost for them to produce it in whatever language that you're looking for.
Okay, that's good, because that's I mean, it's amazing. It's growing so fast. So now the APA Audio Publishers Association, you guys have been very hands-on, and for a while when I was the board member for a few years, way back when it was not nearly as big as it is now. What types of things does the APA do? What changes have you seen via the APA in the audio industry, and what impact your actions have had on that?
Sure, that's a great question. So when I started in the industry over 20 years ago, we had, again, probably about 75 publishers that belonged. And then we had some affiliate members, the occasional retailer, producer, narrator. That affiliate group has grown significantly over the years. So we actually have a lot of individual narrators who are members. And if you are a publisher member, you can participate in things like speed dating, where you have an opportunity to see 20 different narrators talking about who they are and getting their contact information and learning a little bit more about them, so you know how to cast them as you're thinking about the next book that you're casting. We do a lot of programming. I think when I first became involved with the APA as a volunteer, we had the conference and we had the Audio Awards, and there were some educational programs. Now we're doing educational programs, a few per month, some for narrators, some for publishers, and we're doing a lot of stuff virtually because we have members really from all over the world now. And the tools we have to do virtual events are a lot better than they were 20 years ago. So that's, so that's allowed us to expand our programming. And in fact, we did our conference all virtually this year and had the most people that we've ever had, because you don't have any limits in the room in the same way you would at a convention center.
Or in transportation costs on getting there.
Exactly. Yeah, it's cheaper for people to attend, and it's really easy when you're recording a lot of this stuff to say, oh, I've got to miss the 4:00 session, but I can go back and watch that a couple weeks later.
For sure. So now, any particular stats on the growth of the industry that you can talk about? Because before I've been with you, you've been like the queen of stats.
Yes, well, that 9 years of double-digit growth is really the one that we've been talking about the most. 71,000 titles were recorded in 2020. That's huge.
That's way
So, the great thing about audio is that as more people get invited into learning about the format and appreciating the format, they talk about it, which gets more people interested in it, which makes more sales, which encourages publishers to record more titles. And it becomes this lovely cycle of growth. So more titles being published, those can reach a wider audience, which gets more people interested. So it's all really good news. And what was interesting that we saw in the last 18 months, obviously there was some concern when people couldn't really go out of their houses very often, that we would lose sales because audiobooks are often thought of as something you do when you commute. Suddenly, not a lot of commuting going on.
Right.
And the retailers told us anecdotally that they did see initially that drop off in listening because people were not, going to the car and sitting in the car for an hour and a half in the morning and the evening. But what happened very quickly was that people went back to listening. They just did it at a different time of day. So instead of that morning peak and that evening peak, you were seeing more listening throughout the day and people incorporating listening into their lives in a different way. And frankly, I don't know if you were there, but I think it was in 2010, we did a focus group. And so if you remember, we were all shocked because everybody at the focus group, we're all behind the glass wall, but they were all saying, oh yeah, I really like audiobooks to relax. And all of us who work in the industry were like, we relax? No, we're doing it while we jog. We do it while we do the laundry. We're doing it while we're driving. We thought of it in a multitasking capacity. But the listeners were telling us at that time, no, I just like to do it as a way to read that doesn't use my eyes. And what we saw in the pandemic, when suddenly we're all on Zoom all the time, a lot of people were saying that they were choosing to listen to audiobooks just to get away from screens. It's great for kids, right? If you're on Zoom all day for class, but you still want to read a book, it's a great way to just shut your eyes and relax. And for years, our surveys have told us that people are just sitting around and listening. We didn't believe them at first, but I think we're finally convinced now.
Absolutely. That makes sense too. Also, just all the various, because of the relaxing of the audiobooks, just the stress of the pandemic too, just, the worry and whatnot, and just anybody that makes a mistake of checking into the news regularly just keeps themselves constantly embroiled in all the worry. So it makes a really great way to just disconnect from that, and audiobooks actually tend to transfer you to another time and location better than just reading a book can as well.
Absolutely. You've got the narrator helping you through the words as they're performing them. They're adding a layer. You've got a lot of things like full cast recordings where you've got sound effects and music. Those things I actually don't like to listen to when I drive because I'm like, wait, was my phone ringing? Was that a gunshot? But those are really great for listening and just sitting at home and sort of having that experience in your ears. So it's been a fight between what's the number one location for listening between the car and the home. And the home was winning by a lot for a couple of years. And then the in-dash car players in cars started to get a better experience. So you didn't necessarily have to plug in your phone. You would just bring your phone in and it would pick up from where you left off. And so people started to do more listening in the car. That changed in 2020, and it'll be interesting to see what happens. But yeah, the home, relaxing and getting out of the head is a big part of listening.
Yeah.
Of course, everyone seems to like to listen to murder and mayhem, but that's better than news, I guess.
Yes. So any particular age groups that do better? And then you got the age groups listening, but also genres by age group too, if you've got that kind of drill down.
Well, what we've seen in the last decade is that as podcasts have risen and that younger generation is listening to podcasts, they're also listening to audiobooks. So the average age of the listener has gone down. We don't measure what genres they're listening by age. We just didn't know that mystery, suspense, thriller is always very much at the top.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Yeah, I did some research a few years ago in Mexico, and for audiobooks, and found they don't really do a lot of audiobooks. They do podcasts. They do the audio on podcasts, and that's how they monetize their audiobooks, is via podcasts on there. Is that like a Mexico only type thing, or is that also happening elsewhere for monetizing purposes?
Here in the US, we've been built kind of on that credit subscription model. So you get 1 credit per month and you can listen, pick out your title and listen. What we're starting to see now is that as podcasts and audiobooks kind of developed and grew together, the retailers are bringing them together into the same location. So, for instance, Spotify and Apple and all of these different vendors
Mm-hmm.
are selling both. Podcasts are generally free and ad supported, and audiobooks are generally paid for in some way, whether it be an a la carte sale, a credit subscription, or an unlimited subscription, kind of like your Netflix model. All of those things exist. And I think it's getting a little closer together. So we're starting to see stuff that would typically have been a podcast now available in an audiobook retailer and vice versa.
I get it. Now, it used to be, like you said, with your cassettes, and then, or actually records beforehand at libraries, and then it went to cassettes, and then I guess it never really had the 8-track or the 4-track tapes on audiobooks, I don't think.
I think there might have been some 8-track before the cassette was big, but
Yeah.
not much.
Yeah, and then the CD, and now it's gone to the digital. But in terms of the system, the programs, you've got the credits, which is what I guess was originally made popular through Audible. I think they're the first one that did it. But then you got the unlimited subscription, which started coming into play maybe half a dozen years or so ago, and it's growing. Is that going to take over the credit system, or how's that going?
Yeah, I think that's the question is, when will that transition happen? I think it's hard to imagine that we're going to maintain a credit system in a consumer world where everyone is more used to subscription, but you never know.
Mm-hmm.
I think we have a lot of subscription services now. You used to have cable, right? And you have one subscription to cable and you get all your channels, and now you have 7 apps instead. So I think there's going to be a lot of movement in the next decade of how people are buying and where and what that model is. And I'm not a retailer, and so I can't really say what's going to win.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think everyone's taking a look at the different models and trying to figure out what can ensure that the original rights holder gets a good living off of the way it's being sold.
Yeah, because that's a key issue on this whole thing with whoever owns that property,
Right.
that they're not ripped off and that they can actually reap the benefits of their work, their creative work, because that's what they do.
Exactly.
So, yeah, one thing we've been working on for a while for our stuff, because we've not released anything since 2016, but we're about ready to start up again. We've been working on an app. So we have everything be loaded on the app in a new dedicated site for the app to be able to download. Is that something that's being done more and more by publishers? Robin Whitten suggested that to me, 10 years or so ago after Book Expo America once in New York. We were at a deli and she said, "You need to do this." And I said, "Okay." And so we've been working on it, and then she just reminded me of it recently. Remember when I told you that? And so, yeah, we're about ready to launch it. So is that something that's becoming more and more a thing, or what?
I think a lot of publishers have tried an individual app. It really depends on your market and your content. Maintaining an app is very expensive, and it's how much marketing capacity do you have as well. So what's great about working with retailers that have their own apps is you can be the creator of the content and you put it up and you can do some marketing around it, but it's really all the the work of fulfilling the order and making sure the customer is happy, that's falling to the retailer. So it really becomes a question of how do you want to spend your time and your dollars as a publisher or as a rights holder? And I think an app is a great opportunity for certain publishers and not for others.
Got it. Okay. So now with this, all the transition going more and more digital, bookstores. So
Yeah.
So what's the deal with what's the basic tendency right now? Because it seems like audiobooks and bookstores is becoming a long lost grandchild that's going to become not just a distant relative, but just not even a thing anymore.
Well, actually, there's a company called Libro FM that does a lot of work with independent bookstores. And so they saw, of course, during the pandemic, when a lot of bookstores could not be open for physical, browsing, a way that they could sell specifically audiobooks was to work with a company like Libro that would let them sell the audiobook off their website. So you could be supporting an independent bookstore and still having a great audio experience. And they, as a bookstore, don't have to maintain the app themselves, but they can partner for a great customer service experience.
Oh, that's great. So then, because that was a concern, because obviously I'm very much in favor of the life cycle of bookstores continuing. Yes. But then you see, like, as it gets more and more digital, it's like, why go to a bookstore to buy a digital book? When you can just click a button, you download it from whatever you use as your favorite source.
It's true, but who doesn't like to browse, right? I wanted to buy an office chair the other day, and so I went into the store, I looked around, and got a chance to sit in the chair. It's the same with the book. I like to look at the cover, I like to open it up, and then I might just stand in the store and buy the audiobook digitally right there. That's a good option.
So can you get it so that the store gets credit for it?
Oh, yeah, exactly. So you basically are going to the store's website, and although it's back-ended by Libro FM, the store is getting a portion of the sale, and you're supporting your local bookstore even as you're listening to an audiobook.
That's a great data to have there. Let's see now, Audible became the big gorilla in the industry. How is it evolving now? Because there's been a lot of other players and working hard to be able to fight the fight, and so now they're they're standing up now in the field of competition.
Yeah, so I always talk about 10 years ago when I would put up a slide at a presentation that I was doing, say it would have Audible and Overdrive. So Overdrive in the library market and Audible in the retail market. And now when I put up that slide, we have 40 different logos on it. And that's not all of the different retailers for the library and retail market. So there are a lot more options for people now. As the market grows, it gives an opportunity for more retailers and library vendors to get involved. And they're seeing the growth of audio, so they are getting involved.
That's great. And where would a person go to find that? Because I know if you just Google audiobooks, it'll have like the top 2 or 3, but you said 40. I wouldn't see that looking for. Where would they go to be able to find these different vendors?
Sure. Well, of course, Googling is one way. Checking out your local library. A lot of these vendors are international. So if you are in a country like Sweden, you have the option of Storytel. But really, checking out your local bookstore is a great way to go, because then your local bookstore is getting a portion of that. There's audiobooks.com, there's Downpour, there's, lots of different vendors for your library market as well. So I don't know a good way to get a list of those vendors in particular, but keep your eyes peeled.
Yeah, because some things you just get into the habit of, okay, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So you just kind of like, I'm still just doing the way I always get my books or my audiobooks, and it's become very easy. But it doesn't mean it's the best.
Right. And now with places like Spotify getting into the audiobook market, so you might be there as a music listener and not someone that's listened to audiobooks and run across an audiobook. And so the fact that more retailers are making audiobooks a part of their offering means that you'll be able to find audiobooks in more places. And again, if you're not an audiobook listener currently, you'll have a chance to have more exposure.
That's good. So, what can the Audio Publishers Association do for an author who would like to see their work made into an audiobook? It's like, we talked about it a little bit, but just straight point blank. So should an author become a member, an associate member, or what can they do to better utilize that resource?
Well, first thing, and it's free, is go to that Getting Started page and start figuring out how you want to be involved in the audiobook industry. It's not particularly expensive to join, and by joining, you will have access to educational events that we're doing and to the full research so that you can see what's going on in the industry. You also get discounts to the conference and to the very important Audio Awards if you want to submit your title to be considered for an award. So it's not a huge lift to become involved in terms of dollars. And then there's plenty of networking opportunities. So you can meet narrators, you can become involved in a committee and get to know people. And I found that we are very collegial as an organization, as an industry. So getting involved and coming to some events is a great way to gain knowledge, to meet other people, and to develop a circle of people who can help answer your questions.
That's great. Now, you have every year have your annual, the APAC, the Audio Publishers Association convention or conference.
Conference, yes.
So is that going to be now both in person and virtual in the future?
So in 2022, our plan is to do an in-person conference in New York in early March. We don't know beyond that. I personally think that there's a lot of value to having some years be a digital conference and some years be in person. It's a different experience, but it's certainly equalizing to be virtual. The networking isn't quite as good. So doing both seems to be a good idea. Ultimately, it's up to our board of directors to make that decision, but that's certainly my recommendation. And we're a small staff, so doing a hybrid show is probably not a great option for us.
Right.
You want to give our time and attention to the one experience you're having at that moment.
Right. Now, do you record the individual panels? Because sometimes there's really good panels that would be appropriate for somebody to listen to.
We do if it's virtual. We don't in person, in large part because of the venue that we've been using that has not been a great option or experience. And frankly, it's very expensive.
Yeah.
We've tried to keep the cost of having the conference be reasonable. We all know that costs have been going up this year, so it'll be interesting to see what price point we have to come in at in 2022. But because the other thing that we're really striving for in person is an interactive experience, I don't find that those do well when they're recorded, right? So, again, it's not something that we've been recording except when we do it virtually.
Right. Okay.
And we do a lot of virtual events now.
Yes.
And if you join, you have access to everything that we've recorded in our, the back end of our database.
Yeah, for sure. So now on the you're also the publisher for Audiofile magazine, and looking there about, and it has Michele Cobb, and it has your favorite audiobook is Blindness.
Yes.
So how is it that's your favorite audiobook?
So it's a book that has very, very little punctuation, and it's not one that I find is easy to read with your eyes. So I happen to decide, I'm going to listen to this. And it's a fantastic listen. Jonathan Davis, who narrates it, does an amazing job. And it was one of those books, it's not particularly long. It's maybe 6 or 7 CDs when I listened to it. And I didn't want it to end. So I would listen to it for like 20 minutes, and the rest of my drive to and from work, I'd turn it off so that the experience would last a little bit longer.
Well, that's quite a testament then to the quality of that story then, that would have you
it's a great book.
Sacrifice to do that, to make it go on. So what do you see as some of the biggest moments in the audio industry? So, either from when you got started or even that led up to something that you learned about prior to your starting, then however many, if it's 5 or 10 or 2 or whatever it is, any particular big moments that you've observed in the audio industry?
Well, that transition to digital, we got kind of a slow start, but when the iPod came out, that was a big driver of getting people to listen. And then if you start to look at where audiobooks again, really found a rise, it was right around the push around the smartphone. So suddenly, I who travel a lot did not have to carry 12 or 16 CDs with me. I'm carrying a computer in my hand and I can have 12 or 16 audiobooks on it, no problem. So that's something that I think has had a big impact. And frankly, the do-it-yourself platform of ACX really helped. Suddenly, people who were not necessarily working with an audio publisher, but wanted their title to be produced in audio, had the opportunity to do that. And, the last 10 years, it's been like, let's just publish more, let's publish more, let's publish more. How have we done that? And a lot of that has been through the digital realm, right?
Mm-hmm.
Being able to be sent a script instead of via FedEx, ripped apart by, photocopied and ripped apart.
Yeah.
It's coming as an electronic file. And if you can record in your house, that's had a big impact. So not having to get on a train and go into the city and, spend 2 hours commuting. People can record and still have a day job. They can record around their children going to school. There's a lot of flexibility with the home studio that's allowed the industry to be more efficient.
Yeah, now that's actually brings up a good point then, because the home studio, one of my things I had when I was on the board, and that was at a transition period, ACX was just starting then, and there was a concern about audiobooks still being a relatively new experience for a lot of people. And so wanting that first experience to be good, because if it's a bad first experience, it's kind of like, I've done that and I'm not really interested, to be able to avoid that. So how is that? Obviously, that transition has been overcome, but the quality of home recording, is that an issue?
It certainly can be if you don't have a professional microphone and a professional setup and you haven't recorded many audiobooks. Then you're probably going to be struggling a bit in terms of getting the right quality. But what's great is we are, in fact, a decade into people having home studios. So they have acquired whisper rooms and booths that are quite soundproof. They've acquired the right microphones and the software to do this. And again, you can record that at home and you can digitally send it to a professional editor who can do a great job with any cleanup. Maybe you heard the ice cream truck that was coming through before. If I'm in a studio at my house, I have some soundproofing, and then the post-production team can do a good job of anything that bled through or cleanup, or if I'm popping my peas too much. So it takes a number of people being involved in the production, but it's really about having the best technologies to ensure that the quality maintains.
Right. So then, is there any particular guideline or estimate on like what's going to be the cost of producing your own audiobook? Or like, is it done by hour that it gets done, or is it done by project? How can they know that they're not being ripped off, but it's what they're as a proper estimate?
Sure. So we've generally find the industry works on what's called per finished hour. And you can calculate that. Let's use an easy number. So if your book is 90,000 words, we say it's approximately 9,000 words per finished hour. So a 90,000 word title would be 10 finished hours of recording. And the pricing for that per finished hour has a really wide range. On the do-it-yourself platforms, there's the option to split the proceeds with your narrator and have no upfront cost, or to pay your narrator a small stipend that they can send to their post-production team. So your costs have a really wide range. If you need a lot of technical expertise and a full cast, things like that, you can go into a professional studio. Those productions become more pricey. But you'll just want to work with whatever method you have, whether it be do-it-yourself or studio, or directly with the narrator, to get the complete per finished hour cost, which should include both the narration cost and the post-production cost. And then you'll be able to estimate your title based on the length.
Got it. So now if you're going to be doing this yourself, what guarantee do you have that anybody's going to even see it?
Well, that's really going to fall to you. So, it is a lot about marketing. It's not enough to just take a title and put it out there and hope that someone gets it.
Field of Dreams.
Exactly. So you have a couple of options. We do find that it can be helpful to bring out your audiobook simultaneously with the print and or ebook. So you're talking about the title, you're making it available in all formats so people who are reading the title have their choice, eyes, ears, digital, whatever it is. That's one way to do it.
Mhm.
Or you can say, I'm going to produce the title, say, as an ebook, and then I'm going to see how it does, what kind of, following I get. And if you have a strong following, then you can produce it as an audiobook because it's another chance to talk about the title and to get all those people that have read it, maybe as an ebook, to talk about the audiobook. So it's another opportunity to market. But as with anything else, there are no guarantees in life.
Exactly. So now, anything else? Because I quickly divert us over here, but any other big momentous moments in the history of audiobook publishing?
Well, I think that was a lot.
I didn't want to you didn't ask me that. I had one more. So is there anything, because I know and this was earlier on, as a kid, I used to listen to, I had my record, I put it on, and I had my little book. And then a narrator would be telling, maybe it was Peter and the Wolf or something like that. And it'd go, "Bling," when it's time to turn the page.
Yes.
Is that type of stuff still a thing? Is it just, or is that something that happened when I was a kid growing up?
So that's what you're talking about is called a read along. So you get the book experience and the audiobook together. Oftentimes you've got that page turn signal for one recording, and then you have the same recording without the page turn for as you progress as a reader and can figure out when to turn the page yourself. So I think that was one of the big questions. How would that type of material translate into the digital world? So still a lot of CDs sold, even though it's not the primary format, that book and CD kit. But we're also seeing books that have an MP3 player built in, like the Wonder Book from Findaway.
Mhm.
So it's actually got the audiobook and the print book all together in one package. And you don't have to worry about losing the CD, which is nice. Additionally, there's a lot of that happens digitally. So you might be having the ebook experience in an app, and it's got the audiobook as well. So I think children's has struggled a little bit more in that transition to digital because we haven't had a ton of places to acquire children's titles from in audio that have been really safe.
Mhm.
I always use the same joke, but if you go onto Audible and you're there with your child and you search for, say, The Cocky Rooster, right? That could be a children's book or it could be erotica. So there are retailers like Epic or Tales to Go, which works with schools, or Pinna, and those are safe spaces that only have children's materials, and those are great options to send a kid to and to know that they can listen and be free and not worry about what kind of rooster that they've heard about.
We've been searching for.
Yes.
So one thing I was curious about is, again, moving forward with audios, is there anything that's been developing with, you got the audiobook, but then going into the visual. So you start off with the audiobook, but then it actually either CGI that automatically gets triggered by sounds, or that makes a video experience as well as audio experience.
We're starting to see all of those things come together. There were things called enhanced ebooks,
Mhm.
which people thought would kind of be the big thing for a while. So it's the ebook, it might have video links, it might have the audio as well. I don't think anything has done quite so well as just the audiobook on its own, in large part because we're trying to escape screens, right?
Right.
So for children's stuff, pairing the audio and the print together is something parents want. They don't necessarily want the added extras of lots of videos. Are there products out there that exist? Absolutely. But I do think it's so much about the words and the performance that we are much more focused on the experience that you don't have to be looking at anything. except maybe if you want to kind of whisper sync along, as it were.
Yeah. Yeah. When we were doing our audiobooks with Galaxy Audio, all of our stuff is the format you don't like, is the is the radio drama category with all the different actors. And
I like that. I just don't like to listen to it in the car.
Because we would have all the actors in a studio together recording, and it was like the old radio dramas where they would play off each other and be a lot more. There'd just be a lot more excitement and intensity. It would just bring everything up about 20% of the notch on that stuff.
Exactly. And that's what LA TheaterWorks does. They actually record live in front of an audience in most cases, so you can hear the audience react. And I love that experience of having all the different people playing the different voices, and that full cast experience. As someone who loves theater, that's perfect for me. I just have to be careful to not choose something with gunshots and phones in the car.
Yeah. We had one time the review editor for Library Journal, because he loved our stuff. We got everyone that came out got great reviews because he wanted to listen to them himself. But he said one time when he was going out, it was one of the mysteries. He went out there on his porch, lit a cigar, and was ready to start listening to it. And then all of a sudden, it's like, oh no, it's raining. But it was the audiobook. It was a downpour in the story. Then he looked out, like it's bright and everything. He's like, oh no, it was the story itself that was doing that. So, because that's something that for us was an important thing with our audiobooks, because we had like 150,000 sound effects we pulled from. And if we didn't have it, I remember going to New York once with a sound engineer, and we recorded the sound of the taxis on Fifth Avenue. We recorded the subway. New York, it sounds different than other subways. And the New York taxis is its own sound, so we would do that.
And we are seeing in general more of that being done, kind of original works and things created for audio that use sound effects and music and a full cast. It's a lot more expensive to produce.
Yeah.
So I don't think it'll ever be the majority of the market, but it's such a fabulous listening experience. Why would you not want that?
Yeah. So that's what we were able to do. And we did it because the stories are written in 30s and 40s. We wanted to go back to that format that was most popular then, which was radio theater, which is what was done. But now with you got a cast of you have a narrator, and you have some that do like with the original library for the visually impaired, with the straight. It's not monotone, but it's a straight read through without the various inflections. And then you've got some of the really hot shot narrators that can do all the various voices, and the guys impersonating the girls and the girls doing the guys, and all the different inflections and stuff. And then you've got, to me, was the best one ever was when Harry Potter was done, and just the story of how all those different voices that he did. He had to write down notes on it so he knew who it was as I was going through. It was just Dale.
It's such a skill too, Jim Dale.
Yeah.
To be able to transition, it's kind of interesting to watch. You think maybe someone is in the booth waving their arms and doing all these different things for the different characters. And because of the microphone sensitivity, it's actually very, very small changes. So if you watch someone record, you might see them on one character raise their shoulders slightly, or bring their shoulders in, or sit up more straight. It's a really, really interesting skill that they have to be able to play all those characters and to remember enough of it to switch to the right voice.
Yeah. I watched that too, because we had a lot of Disney actors that came in and did our audiobooks for us, and it was just amazing watching them all perform together. And they're saying, I love being with him because I learned so much from him. I was like, what? You're amazing. And they were just talking about how much they learned from all these little, like you said, these innuendos and inflections.
Yes. And it is so great to be able to perform off of someone and to have a genuine reaction. When you are playing all the different characters in a scene, you know how you're going to say it, right?
Yeah.
It's not a surprise.
Yeah.
But that's why I think full cast is a great listening experience.
Yeah, and that's, like I said, that's what we did. And you mentioned earlier in this interview about the one of the big things that the APA does, Audio Publishers Association done, is the Audies. And when we won the Audie Award for our Battlefield Earth, that was, for me, that was like such a special moment. But talk a little bit about the Audis, what it is and why it's such an important event for the audio industry.
We are really taking the time to go through a very rigorous judging process to ensure that the quality audiobooks are rising to the surface. If you win an Audie, your title has been listened to by a minimum of 9 judges. So that's a lot of people. And they're all doing it out of the goodness of their hearts, which is really very generous of them. But it gives us an opportunity to recognize the wonderful marriage of great text and beautiful performances, and to highlight the work that we all do every day, right? It's not just enough to say, oh, we've recorded all of these titles and we've put them out there and consumers have liked them. You want to be able to celebrate which titles have stood out in some way and to recognize all the millions of hours that go into producing anything. Even if it's not an award winner, someone has spent time lovingly crafting this title. So we do want a chance to take a moment as an industry to celebrate each other. And not everything is going to be a nominee or a winner, but we're really celebrating all the work that everyone does together to keep the industry growing.
Yeah, which is really important. And it's good that you're the ones that are kind of like knitting it together and kept it, because there were some definite transition issues that was happening as it was a growing thing, and there was it just needs someone that can actually guide the ship to keep it going forward. In fact, I remember it's been several years. You came out and you presented an award on behalf of, I think it was Audiofile magazine, to L. Ron Hubbard for the audiobooks, and in celebration, I think it was the 10th anniversary of the release of our Stories from the Golden Age. That's what it was.
Right. Yeah.
And it was great. I'm glad you were able to come here and see our offices. But we were trying to do something, because at that point, the full cast, the radio theater was kind of a new thing getting into. There wasn't a whole lot done, because you said it was expensive, and it is. But we had so many. I mean, the fact of the reviews and the awards paid off on that thing, because it definitely was, and they still do really well as audiobooks. But that was great when that recognition that both Audiophile and the APA is able to make towards audiobooks, because it helps to grow it. I know Robin used to tell me earlier on, the high tide raises all boats, and that's been being said by people for eons. But she was the first one that said to me where it actually impinged. I went, wow, that's really good. So, that's something that the APA has very much been a key part of. So you've grown it quite a bit since you've been the executive director. You went from being president to executive director. So president was a voted in thing, and executive director is now there's all the glory is all gone now. Now you're just
do all the tasks.
The president can come in like, okay, everybody, let's cheer. And now the executive director is there when it's making sure that the script is ready and that here's all the stuff, and make sure everything gets out to the votes and stuff like that. So what types of things do you see is going to be happening down the road that you've got planned for the audiobook industry?
Well, we've certainly seen in the last year that the virtual events have been really helpful. We did the Audis virtually, right? It's probably not our first choice, but it was a great way for people all over the world to be able to see it and experience it as it was occurring. And, I think in general, what we are trying to do, and we're a team, like I'm not on my own by any stretch. It's 3 part-time people who are working together with the volunteers to say, okay, what needs changing? What do we need to be reactive to? So something that we've been working on the past couple of years is that more authentic voices were needed in the industry. So we've been working on diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, because one of the things was people didn't necessarily know that audiobooks were an option. We've probably been helped by the pandemic there, right? Because actors who were normally doing stage or film or television, they looked around for the past year and was like, what am I going to do to make a living? And one of those things that you can do to make a living is set up a home studio and start recording. You can still do a television job or a theater job and then come home at night and record for a couple hours. So there's an option when other things are not happening to be able to make a living. And we've started to, it's been a number of years now that we've been trying to go out in the community and invite people in, but it really has accelerated as people realized, oh, I'm a performer. Is there another way for me to work that doesn't involve me leaving my house? Audiobooks are great choice.
Absolutely. Now, you said there's like 71,000 audiobooks produced last year.
Yes.
How many of those were like home studio versus the big publishers, the audio publishers? Is there?
We don't measure that because we're a trade association and because we have antitrust issues. Everything for us is aggregated data. And also we don't ask the publishers how many were recorded in the studio versus how many were recorded at home, especially in the last year. Probably a lot more were recorded at home than in the year prior.
Yeah. Okay, so, but the quality is definitely increasing on the home studios, and that people, it's to put together a home studio, is that they're talking like $10,000, $1,500?
Yeah, it really depends on what your area is like. If you are in a city, you're going to need a higher level of sound protection than you are if you live out in the country where there's no one around.
Mm-hmm.
If you live in the suburbs and your neighbor likes to mow their lawn a lot, you might have to have a higher level of sound protection, or you might be choosing to record more when the dark, when it's dark, so that you're not hearing those things. It's not just about the booth, but also the microphone and the software. So many people used Pro Tools for a long time. We now see different softwares that are not as expensive, like Audacity, used to record. So I recommend, if you're thinking about setting up a home studio, you work with an engineer who understands the placement of the microphone and the soundproofing to really set up what's going to work best for you. Original home studios were people in their closets, and we certainly heard some of that in the pandemic. Not the best choice, but sometimes you just have to go with that,
Yeah. Does GarageBand, is that something that gets used, or is that?
Yeah, all sorts of, all of the different programs get used, and everybody has their comfort level. I would say if you are technophobic, this is not the job for you, because you do have to understand software to a certain extent. But the other thing we saw during the pandemic was that studios were virtually going into your computer. So you could have an engineer in California and you could be at home in Montana, and they could actually be manipulating the program for you. So even if you were a technophobe, as long as you could get online and have them, VPN into your computer, then you could just do your performing thing. Yeah. So technology in general has really helped.
Yeah, absolutely. And what used to be really expensive is a lot cheaper now, and the more technology that exists, the more you can actually do with pushing a button.
Exactly.
Okay, great. So one more time then. So for someone to find out about the Audio Publishers Association, where do they go again?
Audiopub.org.
Good. And then if they want to see some of this amazing publications that you produce for the audiobook industry with Audiofile magazine, they go where for that?
Audiofile with an F, file, like, paper files, audiofilemagazine.com.
Good. And they can find Michele wherever they go in the world of audiobooks.
That's right. You might be regretting it if you Google me, but yes.
This has been great. I very much appreciate this chance to talk with you, Michele.
It was a lot of fun, John. It's always good to see you.
And thank you for listening. Subscribe to the Writers and Illustrators of the Future podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. We've also been syndicated on the United Public Radio Network, where you can find these podcasts as well by just typing in Writers of the Future. Again, I highly recommend you read the Writers of the Future series. These are, after all, who our judges have selected as the best of the best new writers and artists. They can be found at writersofthefuture.com, at Amazon, or wherever you get your books. Writers and Illustrators of the Future are contests created by L. Ron Hubbard to provide a means for the aspiring writer and artist to be seen and acknowledged. It is free to enter and open to amateur short story writers and artists of science fiction or fantasy. Again, thank you very much, Michele.
Thanks, John.